Ed Dickens, welcome back to Union Station in Kansas City.
Good to be
The
back.
beautiful springtime weather, not. It is so hot out here today.
Yeah, it's a little bit warm.
And this is your second official trip with Big Boy. And we've got thousands of people here. How do you explain this? What's the magic with this?
Well, they love the railroad. They love railroading. They love steam locomotives. And who doesn't really? If you're a rail fan or from a rail fan family, you know all about the Big Boy. It's something that even when I was a young person, I knew about the Big Boys. So it's something they're connected to. They've heard the story about how this locomotive was donated. It was one of 25. They built originally, they built 20. During the war in 1944, they needed 5 more. They actually were going to build more, but they settled for them a final order of 5. Well, this is one of 8, the only one running. 17 were scrapped. They were no longer needed. They were melted down for other things, and this is the only one operating. So the interesting story is, in 1961, part of the organization, the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, requested through official channels to the CEO of the Union Pacific Railroad. They had heard that they had donated some steam locomotives and they wanted a big one. And the Union Pacific very graciously said, yes, we'll give you one. They went to the trouble, they picked this one out of what we call the scrap line. So that's the line of locomotives that are no longer needed. They are soon to be cut up for scrap. They selected this one. It just happened to be the next one in line. And so they took it into the shop, they fixed it up, painted it up, put a whistle on it, and they sent it at their expense to Pomona, California, where it sat for 52 years until the Union Pacific knocked on their door and asked them if they would be willing to return it to Union Pacific ownership, so we could then take control of it, fix it up a little bit, get it home, and then spend 2.5 years rebuilding it to what you see right there.
Yeah, and I think your first stop here was right after that rebuild, if I remember right.
That's right, yes.
Now, we've all lived through and we've got stories of COVID and how it's impacted our lives and our businesses and our work. And you undoubtedly have that story too. Plans were canceled, I assume, along the way, and you had to sort of put this on mothballs for a year and a half.
Yes, we did have operations planned for last year, but like so many businesses and so many decisions were centered around the safety and the pandemic, it was pretty clear that we're not going to operate the locomotive during that time. So we've dusted off some other plans. We put this really fun trip together. We're going to just be under 4,000 miles, working our way down to New Orleans. The last time Union Pacific steam locomotives were in New Orleans was during the World's Fair in 1984 with the UP 844. It was actually numbered 8444 back then. So this will be historic in so many ways. The 4,000 class locomotives were not really designed to operate where we're operating them. We've got a really big, rugged, heavy-duty infrastructure to handle the railroad. There's a lot of special planning behind the scenes with curvature, clearance issues, dimensions, some bridge things of that nature. But we're going to make it down there, enjoy that beautiful trip across the Huey-Fallon Bridge. We've talked about how we're going to do that, get some special footage. What a unique view of New Orleans that will be. And then from there, we'll work our way back out and we'll head up towards St. Louis and come back across. And so you'll see us a second time. Here toward the end of the month, we'll be here again. We'll be facing backwards, facing west, just like we were the first time you saw us.
That's right. That's September 1st is our next train day here at Union Station. So if you missed today, you've got another shot at this. You mentioned wartime, and we get this question a lot. What was this engine specifically built to do? Most engines were not just general purpose wherever they needed them. Was this one meant to haul passenger cars, or was this built to be a freighter?
It's a freight locomotive. It's specifically designed to move a lot of tonnage. With the initial vision behind the 4884 wheel arrangement was to take the pressure off of the territory between Ogden and Green River. You've got 2 railroad lines there, and it was not practical to build a third. So the only way that you could relieve that pressure, the congestion, just like rush hour traffic, when you've got steam locomotives moving, you've got traffic moving. In order to move the amount of traffic, you have to have multiple locomotives. When the locomotives reach the top of the summit, they have to come back, and that represents just more congestion. So they needed to come up with a way to physically carry more cars, and that's what the 484, the big boys, were designed for. They did pull passenger trains on occasion. They had what's known as a steam heat line if they ever needed them to. But when you think about what the big boy is, they're just too much locomotive for that. You're really not utilizing your locomotives if you're putting a big boy on a passenger train, because there's so many other locomotives that are better suited for that. This locomotive here, a big heavy-duty lugging freight hauler. All of the 4000s, the 4884 big boys, every one of them was used very significantly, well over 1 million miles. 1 million miles of just gutting it out, grinding, pounding, just slogging that freight up the grade. In our world today with this locomotive, we tend to romanticize it. We take really good care of this locomotive because it's ours. It says Union Pacific on the tender, and we take very good care of it. We grease it a lot, we oil it a lot, clean it up. It's got a little bit of stainless steel. It's got a little bit of nickel plating here and there, really nice paint job. So it's seeing a much different life than it did when it was built. When we got this locomotive back to Cheyenne, there was a lot of worn out parts, and you'll expect that. A locomotive is a rock crusher on wheels. If you see what a locomotive does, even on modern diesel locomotive fleet, when you hear these trains going by, they're gutting it out. Those gears meshing, those big electric motors, those diesel engines, those turbochargers, that thing is an industrial power plant. There's not a lot of romance there. It's just rugged, heavy duty, putting out the horsepower. That's what these did. So when these things went into the shop, they had to rebuild them frequently. So as I mentioned, when we took this locomotive apart, we found a lot of parts that we needed to just make brand new, which was our vision from the beginning. We wanted to take a locomotive and strip it down. We had had other locomotives in the fleet that were run for years and years and years with no significant maintenance. So we reached a point where we had to get in and we had to tear into those locomotives and make it completely new again. That's exactly what we did here.
That's awesome. Last question, and this will resolve a lot of online conundrum that's out there. You talked about multiple engines on a train. You've got big boy, and a few cars back, you've got a more modern diesel engine. So the chatter is, which engine is really doing the work here?
That's a question we get a lot, and it's a fun one for me to answer, and I'm glad I have just a few minutes to explain it. We've talked about it a lot, and we like to kind of help build people's understandings about what the diesel is for. So we selected the 4015 engine number for the obvious engine number reason. But the other reason is we're using what we call positive train control. So we have a computer system, a very advanced computer system that works through the wayside signaling and GPS technology to provide all the necessary route information, speed restrictions, or anything of that nature that we need to safely operate the train. The other part of it is if for people when they come see the big boy, behind the wheels you'll see these big heavy brake shoes. And those brake shoes are made of cast iron. Back in the 1940s, these locomotives would roll into a roundhouse every night. And after slogging it out, like I said, after putting out that maximum horsepower, using the brakes to stop, those brake shoes grind down. The one thing that we don't have is a pit, especially right here. You can see how the pavement is right up to the top of the rail. There's no way for us to get underneath the locomotive, and you must get underneath the locomotive and disconnect some components, move that brake head apart, and then take that big giant worn out brake shoe and replace it with a new one. We don't want to do that. So we have the diesel locomotive with us and we use it for dynamic braking. The diesel locomotives have a really interesting system known as dynamic braking where the electric motors become generators and they create an electrical current, and in so doing create resistance, which in effect is the braking effort that we need. So what we'll do, for example, I'll take yesterday as a good example. We'll have an engineer in the second locomotive. I'll call him on the radio and I'll say, hold us right here. And wherever that speedometer is, he holds us right at that speed. So what that does is that enables us to set the locomotive and operate it very uniformly, consistently. It's producing a consistent power output. And then we're operating along and that locomotive is holding us back. So as we go down a little bit of a hill, I don't need to put the brakes on. We go up a little bit of a hill, he reduces the load, and the steam locomotive is operating the entire time. So the other interesting thing in the morning, when we begin movements in the morning, these locomotives used to operate off of what we'd call the ready track at any roundhouse. And the locomotive and firemen, they'd go on duty, they'd get on the locomotive, and they would operate it all by itself. And they'd take it out, the cylinder cocks blowing, getting all the condensation out, kind of warming it up a little bit, getting it ready, park it, go put it on the train. We don't have that luxury here. We're going to leave right here with this train. Oftentimes, you've got a lot of water in those cylinders. So the diesel is a really good resource, it's a really good tool, but it's a very frequently asked question. It's one we get all the time. And I don't care how many times they ask me, I just keep telling them. I tell them the story of the diesel. I add a little bit every now and then.
Well, we're going to tell it to thousands of people right now, so hopefully we get that resolved. Ed, thank you. It is hot out here today. We don't want to keep you any longer than we have, but thank you sincerely from Union Station and our family to the Union Pacific and your team. I recognize so many of your crew from the last time you were here. It must feel like a family to you.
We are, and you guys are a family to us, and we appreciate you hosting this. There's a lot of logistics that goes into these moves. We've got private cars, we've got other interactions with the KCT, Amtrak, the good relationship we have here. It's always fun to come here. You know, we rarely plan a trip east of Cheyenne that we always have Kansas City in our minds.
Well, let's keep it that way.
You got it.
All right, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.